The first thing I remember is the sound of wind snapping the nylon of the tent like it was trying to tear it apart. Not a gentle mountain breeze, not the kind you romanticize when you think about hiking trips and freedom. This wind was sharp, angry, and relentless, like it had something personal against us. When I opened my eyes, it was still dark. The sky hadn't even started to soften yet. My watch said 4:37 a.m. I remember thinking how quiet everything felt beneath the noise of the wind, like the world itself was holding its breath. That was the moment when I realized something was wrong. I called out his name first, then the other two. Nothing. No muffled replies through fabric, no annoyed groans, no movement at all. What scared me wasn't the silence. It was how complete it was. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, and the cold hit me so fast it stole the air from my lungs. My boots were where I'd left them, half covered in frost. The fire pit was just a ring of stones now, filled with ash and a thin layer of snow that hadn't been there the night before. And their tents were gone. Not collapsed, not damaged, gone. No poles, no fabric, no torn straps, just flattened patches of ground where they'd been standing, like someone had carefully erased them from the landscape. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. When I say long time, I don't know if it was minutes or seconds. Fear messes with your sense of time. Everything stretches, everything slows down, and your brain keeps searching for a logical explanation, even when none fits. Maybe they went for water, I thought. Maybe they heard something in the night. Maybe I slept through it. But even as those thoughts ran through my head, I knew they were lies. Comforting ones. Weak ones. Because nobody hikes off before dawn in weather like that. Nobody takes their tents with them. And nobody leaves without waking the fourth guy sleeping 10 feet away. That fourth guy was me. I walked the perimeter of the campsite, my headlamp cutting narrow tunnels of light through the darkness. I looked for footprints, broken branches, anything. The ground was hard and frozen, which meant there weren't many clear tracks. But there were signs, scuffs, drag marks, the kind that don't look intentional. That's when I noticed the backpacks. All three of them were stacked neatly against a tree, about 20 yards from camp. Packed, closed, ready. Whoever leaves their backpack behind on a multi-day hike. I remember laughing once, just a short, sharp sound. Not because it was funny, but because my brain didn't know what else to do. Panic hadn't fully set in yet. It was hovering, waiting for permission. I checked the packs, food, water filters, maps, one of the GPS devices. Their jackets were missing, but not all of them. One pair of gloves sat half-tucked into a side pocket, like someone had pulled them out and then changed their mind. That detail still haunts me, because it suggested hesitation, not urgency, not chaos, something in between. I shouted their names again, louder this time. The sound disappeared almost immediately, swallowed by the trees and the wind. That's when I felt the first real wave of fear hit me, deep in my chest, heavy and cold. We were supposed to check in that morning. Satellite message. Simple. All good. If we missed it, a ranger station down the line would notice. Eventually. Eventually is a dangerous word in places like that. I did the only thing that made sense. I tried to follow them. I grabbed my pack, left the others where they were, and started moving downhill, following what little sign I could find. Broken twigs, slight disturbances in the snow. The trail was barely visible in daylight, and now it was a guessing game. As the sun began to rise, the forest changed color. Shadows stretched, shapes took on definition. And with that clarity came something worse. The realization that there were too many marks in too many directions. It wasn't a straight line. It looked scattered. I stopped at a point where the ground dipped into a shallow ravine. The marks ended there. No continuation. No clear exit. Just a small clearing with exposed rock and wind-blown snow. That's when I noticed the smell. Metallic. Faint. Out of place. I won't describe it more than that. I backed away. I remember thinking very clearly, if I keep going, I might not come back. That thought didn't feel dramatic. It felt practical. calculated, like my brain was finally taking control away from my instincts. So I turned around and went back to camp. I triggered the emergency beacon with shaking hands. It felt surreal doing it, like pressing that button made everything real in a way I wasn't ready for. Once it was done, there was no pretending anymore. No, maybe they're just ahead. I was alone. The waiting was the worst part. Hours passed, then more. The wind eased, but the cold didn't. I rationed food without even realizing it, my body slipping into survival mode automatically. I kept scanning the tree line, half expecting them to just walk out, confused, annoyed, alive. They never did. By late afternoon, I heard the sound of rotors echoing through the valley. I dropped everything and ran into the open, waving both arms like a madman. When the helicopter appeared, slicing through the sky, I felt something break inside me. Relief, yes, but also dread. Because rescue meant answers, and I wasn't sure I wanted them. They landed a short distance away, snow and debris flying everywhere. 2 men jumped out first, then another. Professionals, calm, focused. The kind of people who've seen things most of us never will. They asked questions, simple ones. Names, timeline, last contact. I answered automatically, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. When they followed me to the campsite, their expressions changed. Not shock, recognition. That's what scared me most. One of them crouched near the backpacks, examining the ground. Another scanned the tree line slowly, methodically. The third took photos, careful not to disturb anything. After a few minutes, one of them stood up and looked at me. "Are you sure they were here last night?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm sure." He didn't respond right away. He just looked around again, then said something quietly into his radio. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the tone. Serious, controlled, alert. They set up a perimeter. More teams arrived as the light began to fade. Dogs, more rangers. People with equipment I didn't recognize. The forest filled with voices and movement, but it didn't feel comforting. It felt invasive, like we were disturbing something that didn't want to be found. At some point, one of the rescue leaders pulled me aside. "We found the camp," he said carefully, "but there's no sign of the hikers." I remember staring at him, waiting for more. That was it? No explanation, no reassurance, just a fact, delivered flat and clean like a medical report. That was the moment it truly hit me. Whatever happened out there didn't fit into neat categories, and I had been sleeping 10 feet away when it began. They moved me away from the campsite as night fell. Not far, just enough so I wouldn't interfere. One of the rescuers handed me a thermal blanket and told me to sit tight. His voice was calm, practiced, but his eyes kept drifting back toward the trees like he was expecting them to move. I wrapped myself in the blanket and watched professionals do what they do best, impose order on chaos. Lights went up, radios crackled. Dogs were led carefully along the edges of the clearing. The forest didn't resist them, it absorbed them. Sound traveled strangely there. A shout would feel close and distant at the same time, like the trees were bending it on purpose. I tried not to think too hard. That's something people don't talk about enough. Sometimes survival isn't about bravery. It's about choosing not to chase every thought to its conclusion. But my mind kept going back to the same image. 3 empty spaces where tents had been. One of the dogs stopped near the ravine I'd turned away from earlier. Its handler froze instantly. No shouting, no sudden movements. Just a quiet hand signal that rippled through the team. They followed the dog down carefully, lights angled low. I stood up without realizing it, the blanket slipping off my shoulders. I wanted to go with them. I didn't. That decision saved me in ways I wouldn't understand until much later. They were gone for a long time. Long enough that the cold crept back in through my boots and settled into my bones. Long enough for hope to start thinning out, stretching so far it almost snapped. When they came back, I could tell something had shifted. Not panic, not urgency. Wait. One of them walked past me without making eye contact. Another stopped briefly, opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then closed it again and shook his head. Finally, the same rescue leader from earlier, approached me. "We found signs," he said. That pause told me everything and nothing at the same time. "What kind of signs?" I asked. He hesitated, then chose his words carefully. "Movement," he said. "Unusual movement." I didn't press him. I was afraid of what would come out if I did. The search continued through the night. They expanded the radius, worked in shifts, rotated dogs. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined footsteps circling just beyond the light. Slow, patient, curious. At some point, I realized something else that didn't sit right. No one asked me to help look. Not once. I'd expected to be sent down trails, asked to identify gear, to answer follow-up questions. Instead, they kept me contained, observed, almost protected. That scared me more than being alone. Near dawn, a younger ranger sat beside me. He offered me water, then just stayed there for a while, saying nothing. Eventually, he spoke. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I nodded. "Did any of them say something strange before last night?" he asked. "Anything that didn't fit?" I thought about it, about the jokes, the complaints, the normal stuff. Then I remembered the argument. It had been small, almost forgettable. One of them had insisted we move camp earlier than planned, said he didn't like how the valley felt, said sound carried wrong, said the maps didn't match what he was seeing. We laughed it off. I told the ranger that. He didn't react, just nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he already suspected. As the sun came up, the forest looked deceptively peaceful. Golden light through the trees, steam rising from the ground, birds returning like nothing had happened. That's when they found the last thing. They didn't show it to me, but I saw their faces when they carried it out. It was one of the jackets, not torn, not damaged, folded, placed on a rock overlooking the ravine. Inside the pocket was a small notebook, damp, smudged, barely legible. They asked me if I recognized the handwriting. I did. The last line wasn't a sentence. It wasn't even a warning, it was a question. And I will not repeat it here. The official search went on for days, then weeks, then it quietly scaled down like they always do. The story that reached the public was clean, safe, familiar, a version people could accept without losing sleep. Weather, disorientation, difficult terrain. I went along with it. What else could I do? They flew me out that afternoon. As the helicopter lifted, I looked down at the valley one last time. From above, it looked harmless. Just trees and rock and shadow. But I knew better. Because I'd felt it. Not watched, not chased, assessed. I didn't hike again for a long time after that. When I did, I stayed on marked trails, busy ones, places where sound behaves the way it should. Even now, years later, there are moments when the wind hits a certain angle, or a forest goes too quiet too fast, and my body reacts before my mind does. People ask me if I feel guilty. I do, but not for surviving. I feel guilty for dismissing a feeling that didn't have words yet, for trusting maps more than instincts, for laughing when someone said, "Something's wrong here," because the rescue team found the camp. They found equipment. They found traces. What they didn't find was closure. And what I walked away with wasn't answers. It was a permanent awareness that some places don't want witnesses. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Truly. I know this wasn't an easy story to hear, and it wasn't an easy one to tell. If stories like this matter to you, stories that sit in the gray space between what we know and what we feel, consider subscribing and sharing this with someone who understands that the world is bigger, quieter, and stranger than we like to admit. And thank you again for listening all the way through.